Macintosh, Apple's hot computer. Well, some think the computers that you use, I think at Microsoft, people are the assets. Microsoft employs 500 people, and it's very careful.
Bad news. Here was someone making a computer around.
I mean, there were computers in universities and research labs and in corporations, but nobody had personal computers.
The story of Bill Gates is often told like a legend about a genius. But the reality was much tougher, smarter, and more dangerous. A brilliant Harvard student. A young programmer who wrote an operating system and built the most influential software company in history. But that story is only part of the truth. Because Microsoft didn't write the operating system that made it famous. They bought it. The first person who truly saw the future of personal computers wasn't Bill Gates. It was his friend, Paul Allen. And years later, that friend would say something very interesting. Bill always had an incredible sense for business, but sometimes the price of that was very high. This is not only a story about genius, it's a story about strategy, ambition, and very hard business. The story begins in Seattle in the late 1960s. Bill Gates was studying at a prestigious school called Lakeside School. At that time, computers were incredibly rare. Most people had never even seen one. But the school got access to a computer terminal connected to a huge mainframe. For teenagers, it was almost like science fiction technology. And that's where Gates met the person who would greatly influence his life, Paul Allen. Allen was 2 years older. He was quiet, reserved, and literally obsessed with computers. Bill Gates, on the other hand, was completely different. He was incredibly ambitious, aggressive in arguments, and extremely competitive. They spent hours in the school's computer room, sometimes late at night, sometimes even hacking the system limits to get more computer time. Later, they were temporarily banned for abusing the system. But the school administration quickly realized something. These teenagers understood computers better than most adult engineers, and they were allowed to continue working. Gates and Allen started writing programs, and soon they decided to try making money from it. They created a small project called Traf-O Data. The idea was fairly simple. City services were collecting traffic data on paper tapes. Gates and Allen developed a program that could analyze that data. Technically, the system worked, but the business itself failed. The company barely made any money. However, the experience taught them an important lesson. The future wasn't in hardware. The future was in software. In 1975, Paul Allen saw an issue of Popular Electronics magazine. On the cover was the Altair 8800 computer. It was one of the first personal computers in history. Allen immediately understood what was happening. Computers were no longer just huge machines for corporations. They were becoming personal. He literally ran to Bill Gates with the magazine and said, "This is a revolution!" But the Altair had a problem. It had almost no software. So Gates and Allen called MITS, the company that built the computer. They claimed they had already written a programming language for the Altair. That wasn't true, but they wrote it in just a few weeks. The program was called Altair Basic, and that's how Microsoft was born. In 1980, something happened that would change the entire industry. IBM decided to build a personal computer. At the time, IBM was the largest computer company in the world, and when IBM entered a market, it meant one thing. The market was about to explode. But IBM engineers ran into a problem. They needed an operating system. First, they approached Digital Research, the company that created the CP/M operating system. But the negotiations fell apart. So IBM turned to Microsoft, and that's where the problem appeared. Microsoft didn't have an operating system. Microsoft urgently needed a solution, and they found a system called QDOS, Quick and Dirty Operating System. It was developed by a small company called Seattle Computer Products. Microsoft bought the rights to the system for about $50,000. Then they improved it and adapted it for the IBM computer. That's how MS-DOS appeared. IBM sold it under the name PC-DOS. From a technical point of view, it wasn't a revolutionary system, but the real genius move happened in the contract. IBM believed that the real value of computers was in the hardware, processors, motherboards, engineering. So they allowed Microsoft to keep the right to license the operating system to other companies. That decision changed history. Very quickly, companies started building IBM-compatible computers, and all of them needed an operating system, MS-DOS. Microsoft suddenly found itself in a unique position. While companies were competing to build computers, Microsoft controlled the software layer of the entire industry. Later, Windows appeared, and Microsoft became one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. But the story of Microsoft is not only about success. It is also a story about complicated relationships between the founders. In the early 1980s, Paul Allen was diagnosed with a serious illness. He stepped away from active work at the company. Later, Allen said that one day he overheard a conversation between Gates and another executive. They were discussing reducing Allen's share in the company because he was no longer working as actively. Allen was shocked, although later they managed to maintain a working relationship. But that moment revealed something important. Business in Silicon Valley can be very ruthless, even between friends. The story of Microsoft is not just a story about programming, it is a story about strategy, ambition, and understanding where the real power in technology lies. Companies were building computers, but Microsoft controlled the operating system, and whoever controls the operating system controls the entire ecosystem. And sometimes, the biggest technology empires are built not only on code, but on one smart decision in a contract.